On a rainy Friday night in Chicago, inside a cozy diner, a young deaf girl was waiting for her blind date. She adjusted her dress, practiced her smile, and prayed silently in her heart that this night would change her life. A few moments later, her blind date, Ryan Miller, walked in. Lily smiled and tried to communicate with her hands, but Ryan's forehead tightened with irritation. In a harsh tone, he said, "You didn't tell me you were deaf." The words pierced Lily's heart like a dagger. She was deeply worried about what would happen next. But little did she know that within moments, everything was about to change. Moments later, her blind date, Ryan Miller, finally walked in, his phone glued to his hand. Without even making eye contact, he slid into the seat across from Lily. She smiled politely and began signing, hoping he would at least try to communicate, but his brows furrowed. "You didn't tell me you were deaf," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut the air. Lily's heart sank, but she stayed calm, writing a note on her pad. "I can still be a good listener." Ryan rolled his eyes, muttered something about not wanting extra challenges, and stood up as if embarrassed to be seen with her. Around them, the diner buzzed on, but Lily's world felt like it had frozen. Tears threatened to spill, yet she forced herself to remain still, her hands trembling under the table. At the table beside hers, Michael had seen it all. He clenched his jaw, anger rising as he watched Ryan leave Lily broken in the middle of the diner. Grace tugged her dad's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, why is she crying?" Michael turned to his daughter, his heart aching, because years ago, his late wife had struggled with hearing loss too. Memories flooded back of how cruel the world had been to her, and now history was repeating itself before his eyes. Michael couldn't sit still. He looked at Lily, who sat with her head bowed, trying to disappear from the stairs. Then gently, he lifted his hands and began to sign across the tables. "You deserve better," Lily froze, her teary eyes widening as she realized a stranger was speaking her language. The diner's soft chatter and clinking plates slowly faded for Lily, as though the world had dimmed around her. The moment Ryan had walked out, it felt like a spotlight of shame was fixed on her, exposing her vulnerability to everyone in the room. She lowered her gaze, praying no one had noticed her rejection, wishing she could disappear into the cracks of the floor. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her water glass, but even lifting it felt like dragging a mountain. The silence within her was deafening, pressing harder than the noise of the bustling diner. And then something unexpected broke through that silence, not with words, but with movement. Out of the corner of her eye, Lily caught sight of hands moving gently in the air. She blinked, uncertain at first if her imagination was playing tricks on her. Slowly she lifted her gaze, and across the next table a man was looking directly at her. He wasn't staring with pity, nor with curiosity, like so many others had done in her life. His expression was calm, steady, and filled with quiet strength. His hands formed shapes she instantly recognized. "You deserve better." The words, silent yet louder than any sound, struck straight into her heart. Her breath caught, and she froze. Was this really happening? Was someone here, in this ordinary diner, actually speaking to her in sign language? She stared at him, her eyes wide, tears still glistening at the corners. Her heart began to race, not from fear, but from the sudden shock of being understood. The man's gestures continued, slow and deliberate, as though he wanted her to feel every word. "Don't let one person's blindness define your worth." Lily's lips parted in disbelief. Each sign felt like a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea, pulling her back from the edge of despair. She had prepared herself to go home broken, ashamed and alone, yet here was a stranger, pulling her into the light with nothing but his hands. Lily pressed her hand to her chest, the trembling of her fingers betraying the swirl of emotions inside her. She tried to form a response, but for a moment she was too overwhelmed to move. All she could do was gaze at him, her tears finally spilling, though they no longer felt heavy with humiliation. They were tears of recognition, of being seen, of being valued in a world that so often ignored her existence. Across the table, the man's little daughter watched the entire exchange. The girl, no older than 8, tugged gently at her father's sleeve and whispered, Daddy, she's smiling now. Her voice was soft, but her eyes sparkled with the wonder of a child who had just witnessed something extraordinary. The father nodded slightly, his gaze never leaving Lily's. His hands signed again. Don't hide. You are not less. You are strong. Lily's lips curved, just barely, into a fragile smile. It wasn't the forced smile she had rehearsed in the mirror earlier that night. This was different. This was real. The heaviness in her chest loosened as she realized that she was not invisible, not here, not tonight. She leaned forward slightly, almost afraid the moment would vanish if she moved too quickly. Her eyes locked with his, and in them she saw no judgment, no hesitation, only an honest compassion she hadn't felt in years. The diner around them continued as usual, orders being called, silverware clinking, but for Lily, the world had narrowed to this connection. Every second felt suspended in time, every gesture carrying the weight of something life-changing. She had come expecting rejection, but instead she was discovering something far greater. Finally, she lifted her hands, slow and uncertain, but determined. She signed back, "Why? Why would you care?" Her eyes searched his face, bracing herself for the kindness to evaporate like a fragile dream. The man's answer came not with hesitation, but with a firm steadiness. He signed, "Because I know. I know what it's like to love someone who couldn't hear, and to watch the world treat them unfairly. My wife, she was like you." His face softened, and for a moment his own grief flickered through. Raw and unguarded, Lily gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, her heart aching for a man who carried loss and yet still had room for kindness. Suddenly everything made sense, the patience in his signs, the depth in his eyes, the way he reached across the distance without fear. This wasn't just empathy, this was lived truth. Her tears flowed freely now, but they weren't bitter. They carried healing in their warmth. She signed back slowly, "Thank you. You don't know what this means." And he shook his head gently, his daughter leaning against him as he signed with certainty. "I know more than you think." In that instant, the shame of rejection transformed into the light of revelation. The girl who had walked into the diner full of hope, only to be shattered, now sat with her heart rebuilding itself, stronger than before. The stranger who comforted her wasn't just offering kindness. He was offering proof that even in the harshest moments, humanity could shine through. And for Lily, that night became a memory she would carry forever. Not the pain of rejection, but the miracle of being truly seen. Lily sat there, her breath uneven, her hands still trembling slightly from the storm she had endured. But now the trembling wasn't from fear. It was from the weight of relief that someone had chosen to see her, to lift her, rather than push her down. She wiped her tears gently, and for the first time that night, her shoulders straightened, as though an invisible burden had finally been lifted. Her eyes met Michael's across the table, and she saw not a stranger, but a man with hesitant movements. She signed, "Thank you. You don't know what this means." Her fingers moved carefully, her emotions tangled between gratitude and disbelief. Michael leaned forward, his expression calm but his eyes glistening with sincerity. His hands responded, steady and confident. "I know more than you think." The words echoed in her soul. She tilted her head, curiosity mingling with hope, urging him silently to continue. He glanced at Grace, who rested her chin on her small hands, watching her father as if this moment were the most important story in the world. Then Michael signed again, slower this time. "My wife, she was deaf too. She taught me to see with my heart, not just my ears." Lily's breath caught. Her heart ached for the man who had carried such love and loss. Yet even in his grief, he had found the strength to reach out to her. Tears welled in her eyes again, but they no longer carried the sting of shame. They carried understanding, empathy, and something she had thought she'd never find that night: acceptance. Michael's gaze softened. "Don't let the cruelty of one man make you forget who you are," he signed firmly. "You are not broken. You are not less. You are more than enough." Each gesture struck like a spark in her heart, igniting a fire she had let the world smother too many times before. Lily raised her hands again, this time steadier, stronger. "Why would you care?" she asked, her voice almost trembling, though she signed it more clearly than she had signed anything that night. Michael's reply came without pause. Because kindness isn't a choice, it's who we should be. Because my daughter deserves to grow up in a world where people like you are honored, not rejected. Grace, her innocent eyes glowing, leaned toward Lily with a shy smile. She pushed her plate forward, a piece of pancake balanced on her fork. "Friends?" she asked softly. Her voice filled with the unfiltered purity only a child could give. Lily's lips trembled, and then curved into the warmest smile she had smiled in years. Her heart swelled, realizing that sometimes it's not grand gestures, but the smallest ones, a child's offering, a father's courage, that rebuild a shattered soul. The diner around them continued with its noise, but Lily felt as though the universe had grown still, cradling this fragile yet powerful moment. She had walked in fearing rejection, believing the night would end in silence and loneliness. Yet she was leaving with something far greater than she had ever expected. She was leaving with proof that hope still existed, that kindness could rewrite the cruelest endings. That night, as she stood to go, she carried no bitterness for the man who had left her behind. Instead, she carried the strength given by another, the belief that she was worthy, that she deserved more. And for the first time in a very long time, Lily truly believed it. She didn't just survive rejection that night. She was transformed by compassion. And as she walked out into the cool Chicago air, the rain now slowed to a gentle drizzle. She felt the world open again. Somewhere deep inside her, a voice whispered, echoing, "Michael Signs, you deserve better." And she knew she would never forget it.